Well, today we start with soil. As I have said, in the last class we concluded about water pollutants and things like that. We have worked in detail about water pollutants. Here today we will discuss about soil. Soil is, soil as you know, soil is the medium for cultivation and sustenance of plants, without which large living beings would not have survived in the way as we know today. Is a medium for cultivation and sustenance. There is a medium for cultivation and sustenance of plants, without which large living beings would not have survived in the way as we know today. So the soil remains, is a most important productive medium on which the human culture has developed. Remember one thing, that it says today's population of 6 billion people throughout the world, if that can be fed, the single largest medium on which the food resources can be generated is basically soil. We have different other mediums, like we have some water medium also where plants grow, but that would not have been sufficient to feed this large mass of people, large population of people. Not only that, apart from man, apart from humans, there are other animal beings that we know of. They also survive on plants. So soil remains a very important area of environmental science and engineering, because it's as we will see that understanding of soil in terms of a medium for vegetative growth, that is very important for us. Vegetative growth is absolutely important for human survival. So soil, as you can know by definition, if we just see soil by definition, soil refers to very generalized definition of the soil, the loose material, you can say loose and unclassified material composed of weathered rock and other minerals. And also another important thing that you have already known, also partly decayed organic matter. That covers large parts of land surface on Earth. Soil refers to the loose and unclassified material composed of weathered rock and other minerals, and also partly decayed organic matter that covers large part of the land surface on Earth. So this is, this is on the large versus on the earth, okay, on the earth, right. So here you can see this is, what we have. So this is a very general definition. I'm just going, in a very simple way as to identify soil. As we go further, we would the thing is, this loose and unclassified need not have to be so generalized. It does not evoke a sense how soil is, but as you can see, you can physically, if you do not know, as if you are a blind person, if you are handling soil, the soil would come to be something like this, where it is very loose and it will have weathered rock and minerals and also partly decayed organic matter that covers large part of the land surface. So large part of the land surface. This is where, this is the basic definition of soil. We will mostly discuss other things about soil, but let us go further on this. We would say, why it is soil is so very important. I mean, again a general study. We will again work on details of this. Properties of soil that make it useful. Properties of soil that make it useful. What are the properties? The first of all, the most important property is provides water, nutrients and anchorage of plants. And trees in all possible areas of their germination and growth. On the earth, right? Provides water, nutrients, anchorage. Anchorage is anchorage of plant and trees in all possible areas of their germination and growth on the earth. On all possible areas of their germination, the germination of the plants and trees, germination and growth on the earth. Not only germination, it should also support growth. Both of them are important. Provides anchorage. Anchorage is by which the plants remain stuck to the soil, by which the plants can stand on the soil, by which the trees can stand on the soil. That is the anchorage it provides. There is the water it provides is, as you have known, this is the water through the root system. Mostly more than 95% of the water that a plant needs goes through its root system. About 5% it might absorb from the atmosphere. So here the nutrients, most of the nutrients, the soil nutrients, as you know, all these metallic nutrients, we will come back to them again. All these nutrients are generally driven through the soil. So essential exchange of soil from the soil to water exchange takes place in the liquid medium. Remember, as you know, like we can take solid food, the plants cannot take solid food. Plant has to be, everything has to be found in the form of a dissolved state, that is in the form of a certain vaporized state or in the liquid phase. So unless they are soluble, they cannot be drawn into the plant root system. So this is what is important about this plants. Provides, this is another very important thing, provides habitat the habitat for decomposer organisms, an essential role, play an essential role, which play an essential role in carbon and nitrogen cycle. This apart, I mean this essential role apart, I mean this role, I mean the essential in carbon and nitrogen cycle. Apart from this provides habitat is another very important thing. We will observe this is very important. If you just try to see this, a habitat in the soil speaks of its quality. A soil which is good, I mean which is good for the growth of the plants, would also encourage lot of microorganisms, would also encourage insects, would also encourage worms, would also encourage a lot of fungus. It will also encourage the larger living beings, creatures like rats, rodents, then any kind of other insects that they follow, snakes and the foxes. All that are basically drafted by the soil quality itself. You would observe, I mean this is for us to, even if we do not know much about the soil, if you just try to observe, the one best way to find that if the soil is good or not is just to observe how many organisms, I mean how many living beings actually reside in them. The worms are very important. The earthworms that they are extremely important for the soil. Extremely important. Soil is a continuously a highly active body of activities. It is always pregnant with lot of activities. Soil is not the way it is not a static material. It's a lot of dynamic reactions, lot of dynamic changes take place in the soil within the real time. So it's very important for the soil to be a habitat where it would allow the other plants, creatures, small insects to reside in them. So here it says you will always find that this is what is particularly a very damaging site today. In all places you will see that people, I mean without knowing that they cut trees and they disturb the soil, and as a result of which it is generally trying to understand they form the lower part of the pyramid in the food chain. The food chain that we know of, so lower animals, shorter and lower animals and creatures being used as a food for the higher animals and brings, and that is how the pyramid takes place. So from the lower, from this fungi, the insects feeding on the fungi, if this the worms or other larger insects feeding on the smaller insects, then larger insects are being fed by the toads being eaten by the snake is being eaten by the birds, and that is how the birds are eaten by the human beings. So you can see the food chain taking place. This food chain and the food pyramid, the basic part at the bottom of the food pyramid is essentially where in the soil most of the animals and plants live. So they remain as the central point of any development of human culture, development of the culture that we know of. Agriculture, farming, all this remains the basic things of economy. Economy depends on that. Economy does not depend on the services that we see. Economy does not depend on the education system. It depends, but the primarily depends on the agriculture. Unless the first part of the economy, first chain of the economy doesn't work, the next, the forwarding things that take place would not exist. So suppose you would find in many cases like this, when there is a bad crop or bad monsoon or heavy drought taking place, you will find that also that the people's spending power becomes less, and the whole other things take place. So the demand is less, demand becoming less, the other sectors begin to be affected. If agriculture is doing well, if the farming community is doing well in any country, its economy also gets supported by that. And for the farming community, one very important aspect is soil. Without soil, without its regenerative capacity, without its use of its capacity, no economy would stand on its own. Okay, this is the first and foremost thing. So, here this is where it becomes extremely important. Another very important thing is acts as a buffer, for say a buffer for water, also water and water plus soil, pH, buffer and temperature control. Particularly, in the time of the year when the temperature is very high, the soil, by means of its moisture that is contained within it, and the structure by itself, it can support a certain buffer for cooling the temperature of the roots, so that the root functioning remains alright, good. The root, what is supposed to do, is in a position to do that temperature change, and so this is buffer for temperature, the temperature control. It works as, then it is its ion exchange potential, resists the loss by leaching and volatilization. The understandable thing is this is a particular property you would always understand. You see this, you would find in most of the cases, like what I am trying to mean here is this. Say there are organic substances, you have also measured soil organic matter, right? What happens to the soil organic matter? The soil organic matter, how it helps? The most important thing that it helps is it works as a pH buffer. That is very important. Most of this soil pH, most of this soil, either being mostly in the remaining at neutral, time to time changing, working as an acidic buffer if there is a higher alkalinity, working as an alkaline buffer if there is higher acidity. They try to balance, and what is most important here is this, to retain this. The retain thing is because of this. Otherwise, the organic matter, if the soil does not protect it from the contact with the atmosphere, what essentially happens is the organic matter would finally be converted into, would be oxidized, and finally be forming carbon dioxide and water, and would leaving the soil. So if they continuously leave, that is what happens in a disturbed soil. If they continuously leave, the soil becomes inhabitable for large number of insects and worms and other species. So for the soil to remain its productive potential, it is important that it resists any formation of an environment where higher oxidation takes place. The soil by its own composition itself can resist higher oxidation due to the contact with the atmosphere, and as a result of which the property of the soil remains maintained. That is why if the organic substances are more, the soil would be in a better position to control the pH. So that is that does not that the loss by leaching and volatilization. Volatilization is that the same thing of carbon dioxide going out of the soil, then any other substances, H2S, nitrogen going out at places like this. So this also is the properties of soil that make it extremely useful for our purpose. Apart from that, this is, if you just observe, trying to say the soil as such, you can see that in most cases how we find soil is the soil examination, this an examination by eye of a spadeful of soil what is this the physically. Now suppose, as I have said in the earlier case, if you keep the eye closed, that is how the soil looks like. It looks like an aggregate, it looks like particles of different aggregate particles, but without knowing much about that. But in an eye examination, how it looks like, what we would find mostly in the soil, aggregates of particles, a few millimeters or in size, which when wet can be crushed by the fingers, roots of plants, pieces of dead roots, stems and leaves, partially decayed, stones and gravel, greater than 2 mm diameter, that you already know, and sand particles, 0.022 to 2 mm dia, earthworms and arthropods, including arthropods, the having a number of pods, feet, the particularly the kind of insects and the higher worms that we generally find, arthropods, and spaces between solid material occupied air air, water, or both. Air, water, or both. So what it has? This is number 1A, that you can see A, B, C, D, E, and F. So this is how, this is what is, in a casual examination of the soil. Casual examination of the soil would provide you the kind of information, the kind of things that you are going to expect of the soil. If you just take in a block of soil in your hand, this is what you would observe in the soil. Say the aggregates of particles size which can be crushed by the fingers, roots of plants, pieces of dead roots, stems, leaves, partially decayed, stones and gravel, earthworms and various arthropods that you can observe in the insects, spaces of solid material occupied by air, water, or both. Air, water, or both. I would tell you, not to just, not to know by the lecture itself. Please try to see it. Take a block of soil. There is just any kind of pedon that we call it, a single small unit of soil. Try to see yourself what you can see in the soil. These are the things that you can observe in the soil, in a very live and active soil. In a soil which is live and active, we would find them in this order. Right. Now, having come to this, this is about the soil part. This is about the soil, that is, the introduction to soil that we can see of. We can think of the introduction of the soil, and having to say, having to see soil as being polluted or being degraded is another thing. What do we expect of the soil? Now here, the soil, when you are in terms of soil environment, in terms of soil environmental degradation or pollution, soil environmental degradation, we deal with two terms specifically. One is soil degradation, another is soil contamination. Both of these are two different things. A degraded soil is not necessarily contaminated soil. A degraded soil is not necessarily a contaminated soil, but a contaminated soil may be degraded as well. Let me explain you how. See what happens, a soil degradation, you just write, the soil degradation, soil degradation is visible. Soil degradation is visible when the soil has lost its structure and texture, so much that the present form cannot be identified with its past form. Say like this. I will come back to this structure part a little bit, but just try to understand. This is say if you are trying to say a soil particle, if you are just trying to observe a soil particle, what happens, you should all see this thing. Mostly, suppose this is what is, particularly a block of soil. if you just observe this as a block of soil, okay, when this block of soil gets degenerated, what we see? What we see is the soil immediately, instantaneously losing its structure. Instead of having a blocky kind of structure, instead of having a blocky type of structure having 3 dimension, the soil almost loses to confines itself into a 2-dimensional structure. So you would find this particularly if you just try to observe, say, particularly where the buildings are being made. Suppose in places in IIT where the new buildings are coming up, you just observe the soil after the rain. You will see that a large part of the soil being being drained off, and it is coming, the initial block of soil is spreading into the roads, spreading into the walkways and places like that. That is where the soil is actually getting degraded. The soil structure is getting destroyed. So it is any kind of engineering excavation like related subjects like mining, then say dam construction, civil construction, say, and then say in many cases like any kind of say home construction, all these kind of industries, the typical what happens is soil degradation, the degradation of the characteristics of the soil, So here what we will find is, say, the texture, I will come back to this, texture, structure, say volatile matter, then say organic matter, volatile matter, organic matter, structure, say nutrients, the typical the metallic ions, the nutrients that these nutrients, this should lead to different texture, change in texture. There would be a texture, but the texture would be changed. That is, you would have to see that the fine particles would be missing. One good way of seeing the soil degradation you will see is that you will find that if you find in the soil after the rain, the finer particles of the soil has left it, and then the soil has been degraded, because that soil is not desirable soil, that soil is not a productive soil. We have to have if we are going to have a productive soil, we have to have a good structure, we should have a consistent texture, we should have a reasonably good volatile matter in that. Reasonably good volatile matter means there is vapor in that, reasonable amount of organic matter in that, and say other nutrients. The nutrients and the dissolvables in the soil that remain, or the salts that remain, would immediately go out of the body of the water. Okay, so this is the changing in the texture, the structure getting structure is lost. Volatile matter is non-consequential. The volatile matter does not exist, or it is too much weight. Organic matter non-existent, nutrients lost, say non-existent. Volatile matter, organic matter, and nutrients. So you can find this and nutrients. So here no nutrients. So this is degradation. This is what is called degradation. It is not. It is something to consider differently than contamination. Contamination is altogether a new aspect, or it's a different aspect. The contamination can take place without the soil being degraded. Without the soil, typical characteristics of the soil has remained, but it has undergone a degradation. I will talk about this in following to this. So you can find out this is soil degradation when there is no foreign material has been included in the soil, yet the soil's inherent properties have been completely changed. This is what is known as soil degradation. Okay, Whereas, when you're discussing about contamination, the contamination is contamination is say inclusion of foreign material essentially toxic to living beings existent in the soil, inclusion of foreign material, I will discuss about this foreign material part as well. This essentially toxic to living beings existing in the soil, to inclusion of foreign material that leads to the death or driving away of soil organisms, driving away of soil organisms, and death or driving away of soil and inducing infertility, leads soil to contamination. So, let me again start with this. Let us discuss about this again. Inclusion of foreign material essentially toxic to living beings existent in the soil that leads to the death or driving away of soil microorganisms and inducing infertility leads soil to contamination. So, this particularly say what is a contaminated soil around us? What is a contaminated soil around us? Have you seen a contaminated soil around us? We see it every day. Let me know it. Let me tell you this. This is, if you go to a petrol pump or if you go to a repair shop, you will find that the soil has been completely blackened. The discoloration of the soil has taken place, complete discoloration of the soil, particularly in the repair shop. If you just see typically the material they discharge on the soil, as a result of that the coloration has completely changed. The soil has been completely blackened or is looking like heavily grey. That is what is the soil, contaminated soil. See here, the soil has not degraded. The degraded in the sense that its texture has not changed, its structure might not have changed, it might still have volatile matter, it might still have organic matter, but since the inclusion of certain foreign materials, which are toxic in nature, like mostly the toxic things are like the volatile organic carbon VOCs, inclusion of say the liquids containing high doses of nickel, cadmium, chromium, right, and then say lead, all this can lead to heavy contamination of the soil. So, a soil, or also particularly if you are relating to an agricultural field containing very high DDT, D-drene or any other organic substances that can lead to the contamination of the soil. So, in a contaminated soil, even if the nutrients are there, even if the other structure of the soil is intact, you will not find any living organism in that soil. You just try for your case, you just take those soil in the repair shop, take it out, and when you are going there, you also take out soil from an ordinary field, soil from the repair workshop and things like that. You will see that that soil there would look very infertile. You will not find a grass of soil, grass also growing on that soil. That is what is the soil contaminated. So here in cases like this, we will not be finding opportunity to discuss contamination in a large measure. Contamination is an extremely important aspect of soil pollution, soil degradation today, but we will not find much time to discuss soil because it itself is a great subject. But try to understand these two things, because in engineering terms these two things have very important connotations, two very important differences. The differences is this, that not all industries or all kind of industrial activities lead to soil contamination. That might lead to soil degradation, but not contamination. But in the other hand, in the other cases, the discharges, wherever there are very serious discharges like taking place, something like in a PCB manufacturing unit, there may the toxic discharge may be so heavy that it is able to contaminate, say landfill, contaminated landfill. If say something like nuclear waste is being dumped on the soil, the various parts of the world are completely charred with the soil has been so much damaged that there would not be any plant or there would not be any kind of farming in 100 years to come. The soil takes a lot of time to regenerate itself. The giving soil its structure, where it will be able to drive growth of its own, where it will be able to generate plants, small seeds, plants, trees. It remains, it takes a tremendously long time if it's left alone. It would take 100 years, 200 years before it can be recultivated, before it can be used for any kind of purpose. Not necessarily for human use, but say to grow a jungle there, to grow a forest there. It would be extremely difficult in those areas. So here in cases, soil remains a very important area, and particularly what we will be discussing here. Our perspective here would be in terms of the soil, in terms of soil's capability to germinate. This is what our discussion would revolve on. Whatever I will discuss on soil would centrally deal with soil's capability to germination and plant establishment. Soil's capability to germination and plant establishment. So now this is what is the main area of our discussion regarding soil. We will not be discussing about soil contamination, as I have said, because this would be different. This would be completely out of our scope. But we would discuss mostly the soil capability to germination, capability to germinate, and plant establishment. Say capability to germinate, to germinate. You write to germinate. Okay, the soil's capability to germinate seeds and plant establishment. So we will discuss this in greater detail. Now, there are not necessarily, the soil is only contributor to the plant growth. There are many other things, that also that also are extremely important for this. The factors, this particularly related to the factors related to germination of seeds, factors related to germination of seeds, and plant establishment are: number one is sunlight which works in the performs function. Where it performs, sunlight performs in the atmosphere and soil. As I have said, sunlight plays a great role. The most important role of sunlight is to provide energy for all kind of atmospheric or the soil soil atmosphere, also soil atmosphere. Soil atmosphere, soil environment. So the sunlight performs mostly it provides the energy for all the environmental reactions, all the physical, all the chemical reactions that take place in the body of the soil as well as in the atmosphere. This is temperature. As you can see, temperature is very important. As you know that in all temperatures where it performs in the atmosphere and soil. Say this carbon dioxide. Another third one is carbon dioxide. Third one is carbon dioxide. Where it performs carbon dioxide, it also performs in the atmosphere and soil. Animals too, animals and other plants to play their role. Animals and other plants do play their role above soil and in soil, where they perform above soil and in soil. This the fifth one is that another important thing is the oxygen. Oxygen, or as we would know as air, or works in the soil. Nutrients mostly, as I have said, in soil, mostly in soil, but some of the nutrients can be also absorbed through the plant leaves, plant body as well. And finally is another important parameter is acidity. The reason acidity or alkalinity. Insulin is not just to say an acidity and alkalinity. So you can say alkalinity. So this would make the change in the potential, so that the osmotic pressure should develop. So this is mostly in the soil. These are the places where it performs. So you can find out this, the acidity. This is mostly the parts that you can see. We would not discuss much about the sunlight, temperature, carbon dioxide, and all other things, because you must be knowing by now. Because all these things are essentially, typical things that are generally discussed, even in high schools also. But we will go into some of the different things, some of the more important parts. Like the other things that we would mostly discuss about is, so the nutrients, we will come back to that again. Acidity, alkalinity of the soil also will come back. The soil water, the first of all, and another important thing that would be the soil animals and other plants. Did we discuss water anywhere? Water is there. Sorry, I'm sorry. This is one. The last part is water in soil. Mostly in soil. Water performing in soil. So we'll start with water. Water has a great role to play. So, water, as I have said, water is the medium. Water is the medium by which transfer of food, transfer of foods, transfer of foods, and foods specifically nutrients, and specifically nutrients take place. Nutrients takes place. In many cases there are some kind of plants which will be having very little chlorophyll, and they would be mostly draw most of their foods through the water. Most of their foods, specifically including the nutrients. The nutrients that you have already known, the water nutrients, say all those kind of anions and cations that are necessary for the growth of the plants would be drawn into the plant by through water, in which water would play as a medium. So here is case that we can observe now. If you can observe, says water as this, the role of water. Let me explain you few things about water, how water remains in this. If you just observe, if you just make a structural examination, an examination of the soil structure as such, you will find that it is mostly the particles that we observe here is, this particles should be, this is how the soil looks like. I mean, if you remember something that we discussed in terms of porosity, this is where these are the things, this is how the soil particles look like. This is how the soil particles, remember the same drawing that we have done. This is how it would look like. So all these cases, if you see these particles here, these particles here, this particle, the things that you can see is, this is how it is looking like, So these are the particles that you can see here. Okay, to observe this in a different type, typically in a soil, if you just observe that fully, when there is completely devoid of water. Suppose, as you can see, there is, as if to suggest, these places, the intergranular spaces are without water, without any moisture. This is called this wilting point, soil wilting point. Soil wilting point takes place because mostly in the peak of summer, soil wilting point takes place in the peak of summer. This is where the soil is completely devoid of water. This is where you will find the soil is beginning to break. The surface is is beginning to break, because all the moisture that binds them together has been by that time evaporated, and so the soil is completely without water. In the wilting, the word wilting is where the plants begin to dry up so much that they cannot stand on their own. They generally try to begin to bend. That is called the wilting point. So this is soil wilting point. Now, having to say that in most cases in the soil, there would be this, whenever there is there in the soil, if we find out this soil, basically the water remains like this. The water remains mostly as a combination of vapor and liquid, right. You will find some area this is filled up with, some area filled up with say water, some area filled up with water, and this some area would be the water is mostly say the water. This is what is vapor. This is what is vapor, and this one is water as such. So this is when this water, the soil remains in these two states. In the soil, water remains in these two states. In a liquid, that is water or liquid, vapor or you can say liquid here. This is known as the field capacity. This is known as the field capacity. This is particularly in all kind of agricultural activity. We generally try to remain the soil in a particular state like this, when there would be sufficient water as well as sufficient vapor, so that the plant, the root can breathe, root can also take sufficient water for its own consumption. This is what is called the field capacity. This particularly, this field capacity you will observe during the winter season. Winter season, when there will be water is generally given. Not excess amount of water is given, sufficient amount of water is given, or the peak of the harvesting, peak of the seed sowing season, when the seed is generally planted in the soil. This is where the soil, this is how the soil should look like. This is how the soil should be. So should have sufficient moisture, should have sufficient vapor, should have sufficient water as liquid. Here again, so if you just see this particularly, as the rainy season approaches, after a good number of showers, all this vapor would be driven away. All this vapor would be driven away, and all these pores, all these intergranular spaces would be filled up by water. This is what is known as the saturated condition of this is called the saturated condition of this particular state is called the saturated water saturated soil. This is water saturated soil. This is on a peak of rainy season or after a heavy shower, right. So this is what it would take place after a heavy shower. So we can observe that we will take this up later on, so in the next class. So this is what is the three situations by which the water can remain. Thank you. We will take it up again.